today. We're at roughly the 1-year anniversary mark of the pandemic-induced global shutdown. Now as we begin to feel the first rays of optimism brought to us by some outstanding scientific research and these miraculous vaccines that are starting to be rolled out slowly but happening, our thoughts can turn to some of the implications and consequences of COVID-19 on the business and practice of law. The session title is 4 Lessons from the Pandemic, and I want to be quick to say that that might be getting ahead of ourselves a bit. The pandemic still has a lot to teach us, and the best we can do at this point is present some initial thoughts and early impressions. But there are a number of useful observations that are now coming into focus, and our speakers will do so over the next hour in 4 areas. We'll have Deanna Hayco, who's a partner at InStudio, and I'll let our speakers introduce themselves more fully in the interest of speed. We'll discuss space planning and usage. Sherry Beffa, Director of Attorney Recruiting at Wilson Sonsini, will we'll talk about recruiting and onboarding. Dan Pennington is the President and CEO of LAWPRO, the professional identity insurer in Ontario. He'll present on professional liability. And finally, Tim Corcoran, a principal of Corcoran Consulting, will talk about profitability and strategy. We'll try to allow a little bit of time for a few questions between each session. So use the little chat bubble at the bottom middle of your screen to send those questions to me or to Debbie. And we'll try to relay them to the speaker of the moment and try to answer those questions as quickly as we can in the time allotted. But with that, I want to hand it over directly to our first speaker, Deanna Hayco. So Deanna, take it away.
Okay, I will. 2 seconds to screen. And there we go. Miss Debbie, just give me a thumbs up if everything's looking okay on your end. Okay, good to go. All right, I'm Deanna Hayco, one of the business partners at InStudio, which is a design and architectural firm. And we have been in practice for 6 years, but I have 20+ years behind me. And when I was going through design and architectural training, I never knew that I was going to become a behavioralist, which is actually what has led me into sort of speaking to you today. So we're going to be talking about space and facilities planning, but really, interestingly enough, we're going to hit the 3 key questions that we posed in the brief, but we're really going to be talking about feelings today. And so just get ready for that. So my opening statement here is building out workspace is a significant expense for any business, pre-pandemic and post. So just keep that in mind that has not shifted. It is a statement that I feel very confident in. But how has the pandemic affected the way people work and use the physical space we call the office? We're going to be looking at that a little bit. Will any of these changes become permanent? That's an important piece that we're going to try to navigate. And do we need as much office space or an office at all? That's the big fundamental question, really. So going to question 1. How has the pandemic affected the way people work and use the physical space we call an office? Well, how close is too close? That has been something that obviously has come through as we've sort of navigated the COVID and all that change. But what I'm really trying to look at here is we need to be looking at space evaluation. And we did this before, and we're going to be doing this in the future. But here is where we're going to be spending some time. If we were to evaluate space today versus, say, March of last year, we're going to be looking at and understanding the building, and specifically maximum fresh air versus the minimum recirculation of air. HVAC changes are very costly. And if you're not in a Class A building and you're looking for new space elsewhere, things that need to be paid attention to is what is the current status. So you would probably want to be looking at performing an IEQ, an indoor air quality test, and looking at filtrations and things like that. The second thing in a space evaluation pre or post pandemic is the magic 6-foot rule. So how close is too close? Well, social distancing will not be going away anytime soon. And we are always paying attention to, in a planning perspective, space between individuals. And we're just going to be paying more attention to that as we look at space and how space is used. The third type of evaluation that should be paid attention to is the hotspots. And the hotspots are elevators, exit stairs, and washrooms. And when I say hotspots, what I'm talking about is the ventilation systems that are going through the building, they get caught in these zones. And those are areas that we need to be paying attention to and bring in additional air if we can. And then, if we're talking about space evaluation, we also want to be looking at a business evaluation. And by doing that, can you remember the moment when you were in the office and someone said, "Do you have a minute?" Right? When they're asking for help, when they're looking for some observation, when they're wanting some shoulder-to-shoulder mentoring, how do we do that now when we're all at home? So from a business evaluation, I've classified it as a 3 C's. What you need to be paying attention to is choice, flexibility in how and where people work, the connection that each other has to the other person off and on screen, but off screen is even more important. And although Sherry's going to be talking about this, culture is very important, because what we're looking for is how are you preserving your culture and how do you intend to enhance it when we all go back to what we might call the new office. So the second question then would be, will any of these workplace changes become permanent? Well, I think we're a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I do feel that there is a few things. General behavior has definitely changed, and working from home, although before was already sort of thought about, not to the degree that it is today. So we're wanting to say yes to that more often than not. In the future, we're going to still be doing that. We will be afraid to touch things for a long, long time. So doorknobs, handshakes, business cards, these are now sort of things that need to be pushed to the past and be looking at it in a bit of a different way. And I think from something that definitely has changed is we need to be prepared to be unprepared. And from a planning and facilities perspective is agility and adaptability. How will the business survive and thrive in the future? Those are the things that we'd be paying attention to. Now, what hasn't changed? Collaboration in person. We know people need people. Communication. Again, we know that people need people, and how are we going to continue to communicate? How does your business communicate with each other and your clients? And then mentorship, that shoulder-to-shoulder learning that was so easy when you were in the office has become a bit more difficult. How do you foster that in a new sort of way of working once we all go back to the office of whatever that might look like? So let's look at the office for a second. Do we even need as much office space or an office at all? Well, the bigger question really is who is that space for? So I'll just run an analysis with you on how we would sort of look at a space. And maybe going back a little bit, we work a lot in tech, we work a lot in law, and then sort of other professional services. So if we were to be looking at a space, and this one was a space that was sort of a workplace that had legal, finance, and tech all combined, and it was progressive at the time, which is only 4 years ago. So if we were to look at that today and say, okay, now how would we evaluate this space? We are actually having to look at it from two perspectives, looking at a low density, and what does that mean? And at a sort of a max density, and what does that mean? What we're noticing is that originally we had looked at space, let's just say that for the sake of argument, it was 25,000 square feet. Well, in 2019, the total seat count that could be within that space was about 200 people. Today, we would actually be reducing that dramatically. The square footage stays the same, but the distancing or pulling people away from each other has changed. And so low density would equate to 80 seats compared to the 200, or a max density would be 130 seats compared to the 200. Now, that was in a combined environment that had law, legal, finance, tech, et cetera, combined. When we're talking more about classic law practices, that is just basically lawyers, clerks, and legal admin, you've always been sitting at a higher square foot per person from the very beginning. And our sense is that's not going to change. It's not going to be reduced. So the square footage stays the same, but how do you use it is the question. What was before a 40-60 ratio split between lawyers to staff, typically of 100-person to 500-person law firm, is that going to change? And that's more about your practice itself. So the question really is what is it for? What is that space for? What are the typical tasks? Are they focused, collaborative, or both? How many visitors are you going to have? Single, few, groups, teams, a number of individuals in the office at the same time? And how do you want to innovate, especially in group dynamics? What does that look like? An office that's 10 by 15 can easily have 2 visitors within it. Do you really want somebody within your closed door space now post-pandemic? That's a good question. An 8 by 8 office, if we were to be sort of looking at it from that perspective, would have no visitors. And is that what you want, a closed door environment? How and what is this for? So space planning and facilities planning is a interesting concept, but the 3 takeaways, I think, are the pandemic has affected the way people work. Not all changes will become permanent. There's no way. But an office space is required for some individuals, but not all. And I'm going to leave it at that. There's a lot thrown at you. I can go into more detail on anything.
Thanks, Deanna. That was that was as kind of portentous as I thought it might be, because I think changes are going to be radical, and this is a hint of things to come. We are now going to move on to the next one. I haven't seen any questions in the chat, and but feel free to, if you have questions, to note them down. We will have, I think, a little bit of time at the end of this to go through some questions. But now we will go over to, bear with me a minute while I set my sights on this, to Sherry Beffa. And Sherry, Sherry's going to talk to us about recruiting and onboarding.
Okay, hi. Yes, I am Sherry Beffa, and thank you for having me here today. I am the Director of Attorney Recruiting at Wilson Sonsini. I've been at the firm for about 8 months, so I did onboard during the pandemic. My previous life, I spent 23 years at Kirkland & Ellis, where I oversaw all of the partner level to associate level hiring for the LA and Century City offices, as well as some firm-wide diversity initiatives. And in my previous life, I was also had the pleasure to serve as one of NALP's presidents. And today I'm going to talk to you about the establishment of culture in a remote environment. And this is a topic that we could spend hours talking about, but I'll do my best in the time allotted. And please feel free to follow up with me with any questions and or to continue the dialogue later. So law firms have traditionally prided themselves on their culture. You know, that certain feeling that defines and differentiates one firm from another in the day-to-day work environment. And it's this sense of culture that allows our firms to recruit the most effectively by selling a particular culture and brand. And, you know, firms that establish and maintain that culture by their in-person meetings and events have been challenged trying to introduce and maintain their cultures in this remote environment. And why do we care? Well, we invest significant time, money, and firm resources on recruiting attorneys to the firm. So it's in all of our best interests to retain the attorneys we hire and ensure that they're integrated in a meaningful way. And especially in this remote environment, we need to be deliberate and proactive in a way that we might not have had to be in person. You know, much of the culture could be learned by walking down the hallways and benefiting from water cooler conversations and impromptu meetings and lunches. And when we don't do this, we're going to end up with client service issues, low morale, potential higher rates of attrition, requiring us to hire even more laterals. And in turn becomes this vicious time-consuming cycle, you know, which can have negative implications for the firm, our clients, and our reputation in the marketplace. So some of the things that we've done right now are to help build culture is to essentially hyper escalate the touch points that we're having with new attorneys and old ones by checking in with them on a frequent basis. You know, how was your week? What questions do you have? Are you getting work? Who have you met? Who do you need to meet? How are you doing? And then checking in with sponsoring partners to ensure that you're hearing the same things, that everybody is doing well. And it's these additional touch points that are helping to build a new culture. You know, one of communication that encourages dialogue on how the firm is handling integration and retention efforts, and then, you know, communicating the message that we actually care for our people. You know, I think there are 3 factors that are enabling culture right now: transparency, flexibility, and inclusion. And I'll spend a little bit of time talking about each of these. You know, and one of the areas where firms have traditionally struggled is with transparency. And now we're finding that transparency, or lack thereof, is actually setting a new culture at the firm, because some firms are doing a good job and some firms arguably are not. You know, and in a world of so many unknowns, you know, information about the firm, its health, and the plans for the future are instrumental in building culture and ensuring proper integration and retention. You know, taking the time to reduce anxiety of all employees is going a long way. And, you know, as I talked to my colleagues across the country, you know, preparing for this, you know, there are common themes. And, you know, the one thing that I think most firms are doing, and the firms who are trying to be transparent, are hosting town hall meetings. And, you know, these are either firm-wide or they're local. They're being held monthly, some are being held quarterly, some are just ad hoc when you have something new to share. And there are, you know, 3 main themes about what's being communicated during these town hall meetings. You know, number 1, the firm's financial health. Number 2, you know, exciting announcements, you know, key victories, announcing new initiatives at the firm, you know, bonuses, what have you, but just, you know, using that time to get people together to share exciting announcements. And then also to, you know, give the firm's thoughts on returning to the office. What is the current thought this month, this quarter, on returning to the office? You know, assurances of what's to come, both in the near term and the long-term future, can't be stressed enough, and is helping to create some sort of culture remotely. You know, some people are really enjoying the ability to work from anywhere, and not even just from home. I mean, some people are working from Hawaii, some people move around every month. And hearing that management is open to continuing this when we reopen offers a certain level of comfort for some people. You know, and likewise, you know, some people who don't have access to an efficient remote setup, have too many people at home, you know, they're eager to return to the office, and, you know, in the same way are excited to hear from partners that it's okay to go into the office. You know, you have to follow certain norms, but it's okay to continue to build a community in the office. And so that's resonating with some people, and that kind of environment is something that people are looking for. But people are all looking for, you know, the ability to plan ahead. So anything that firms can do to communicate this, what's it going to look like? Let's say we reopen in April, but your kid's in distant learning. What's that going to look like for you? And so it's the management's willingness to be open and transparent about what's happening is vitally important right now. And all of this information about how the firm is adapting to this new normal is building a new culture. And it's going to be very interesting to see how the new vault reports come out this summer, I think is when they're coming out. Because a lot of firms, like I said, have struggled with transparency, and they're using this pandemic as an opportunity to reinvent themselves and to become a different voice in the marketplace. And it's becoming noticed. On flexibility, so technology has enabled us to build a culture in a whole new way, you know, and again, some firms are embracing this more than others. You know, 8 months ago, most firms would have only hosted meetings on WebEx, you know, when they couldn't find a conference room and couldn't host a video conference. And most people hadn't heard of Zoom, Ring Central, or MS Teams. Chat features existed through WebEx, Jabber, and other platforms, but they weren't widely used because you could just run into somebody down the hallway or pick up the phone or, you know, deliberately go reach out to see them. You know, and today it seems crazy to think that, you know, to host a video conference, you know, you would have had to book a conference room. You would have had to upload your slides the day before, make sure that tech tested this in all the markets that you were hosting. And, you know, this was only 8 months ago. But now video calls, you know, are the new norm. And sure, we all get tired of being on camera all day, but video calls also create this sense of normalcy and offer glimpses into what people are dealing with at home, you know, both good and bad things. And these interactions have provided surprisingly effective avenues for building personal connections. And, you know, I'll be honest, speaking from somebody who onboarded during a pandemic, I've never met any of my Wilson colleagues in person. I've never seen a Wilson office, and yet I feel a certain connection to the firm, and I feel like I've established relationships. But at the same time, it's important to recognize the limitations of integration in a remote environment and be more intentional about the introductions that would have happened by walking around the office and going out to lunch. When you're onboarding people, the first 2 weeks might be set up with meetings, 30-minute meetings, 20-minute meetings, just to get a sense of building a community and feeling like you know people where you work. The recruiting, the PD teams, the practice assistants can all help set up touch points to recreate these introductions and connections with attorneys to help build and maintain relationships. And in this remote environment, it takes being proactive in helping your attorneys to be proactive to continue a sense of community. In some ways that some methods that firms are utilizing to achieve integration and culture are to, host the office group-wide happy hours. Many Zoom events have happened, from escape rooms to trivia events to even cooking classes. A lot of firms are actually even sending, cheese boards or sending the ingredients you need to cook. So you could actually have a cooking class so that you can engage with people in, the new normal setting. There are a lot of hosted coffee chats for attorneys. A lot of firms are doing this for people who've been with the firm for 3 years or less, anchoring it with a senior partner to help facilitate conversation and to really check in with these junior associates, 3 years and younger, to make sure that they're doing well. We're seeing a lot of video check-ins. We're seeing a lot of weekly team meetings. We're seeing intranet sites that were built, My Virtual Life with information about childcare, events, resources, mental health support services, activities for kids. And all of these are being used effectively to maintain a sense of community. And what we've learned is there's an advantage where we can use technology to integrate across offices and practice groups. Before we would have had to fly people across the country on roadshows to help build a culture within certain groups and certain offices. But now with video, we can build this new dynamic that helps build a new culture and allows people to meet colleagues much faster. And on the interviewing space, it's fantastic because, where you might have relied on attorneys in one office and yet people are in trial, they're not in the office, they're visiting, you can schedule interviews that are, talking to people from 6 different offices all in the same day. And it's just seamless. And it saves considerable amount of time. But what's important to note is that what's missing in this new environment is the ability to wait outside of an office in the off chance that a partner is free and can answer a quick question. So it's imperative that we provide our new attorneys with information and guidance on culture and expectations, as well as information about how their teams work together and communicate with each other and which technology tools are preferred by the team. And providing these tools and information about how to best call or chat, it helps mimic that pop-in effect that helps build that sense of community and support. And for people new to the firm, you need to double down on everything I'm talking about. All integration activities need to be tenfold. Increase the number of coffee chats, lunches, touch points to help set them up for success and make meaningful connections to help feel this sense of culture. Moving on to inclusion, when we're talking about onboarding, it's really important to try to recreate the excitement over starting a new job. The 2020 Fall Associates were a cohort that at least benefited from in-person interaction. A lot of them probably, participated in a summer program. So while onboarding remotely was different, they had a different connection to the firm than a lateral is going to have, who's never had the chance to have any sort of, in-person interactions or even seen an office. So some things when you're onboarding to consider are, it's going to sound silly, but you send welcome gifts, the branded swag from jackets to coffee mugs, something that, it's always appreciated. And it also helps remind you where you work. A lot of people switch jobs and, the only thing that changed, the chair stayed the same, the background changed and the computer changed, but you don't really feel that you're part of a different firm. So you need to generate some sort of excitement about that new firm that you're joining. And so the swag, just for a second, it's not as easy to hand out now, but the vendors have been fantastic about just drop shipping to people. And there's an added expense, but if you can do it, it's something that really does have a positive impact. So some innovative initiatives that firms have been using during onboarding, video introductions, from various firm leaders. So, they're also doing this live, but it depends. If you're onboarding new attorneys every week, then it's not realistic to think the managing partner can attend orientation every week. So firms are recording positive messages that include the excitement about somebody's arrival at the firm. and helps to establish a certain culture. And a benefit in this environment is that you can do a firm-wide message that benefits an entire class of people where, before you might have just been relying on whoever the local person was in the office to cover it. But now, you get to benefit from the best speakers, so it's a result of this, but you're allowed to choose the best speakers regardless of geography and ensure that the right messages are getting across. And the messages that you want to communicate are, one, what's the culture of the firm generally? What's the firm-wide culture of the firm? And then also what's unique to a particular office that they're sitting in. And so try to build that sense of why it's special to be part of the Los Angeles office, the Chicago office, what have you. But, and talk about how each office functions. So other things firms are doing, they're also doing video tours of your assigned office. A lot of people don't get a chance to see the office. So, they had somebody walk around. These aren't high level videos, but they're walking around and saying, this is where you could find things. If you go to the office today, even during the pandemic, this is where you find things. This is what things are going to look like. This is what your office might look like. Other firms, a lot of firms actually have developed newsletters and weekly contests to help people get to know each other and feel connected. They're doing, I've seen some firms, I think it was Lord Locke is doing videos for every new person that joins the firm, and they're having the person record themselves and talk a little bit about themselves so that everybody at the firm can kind of get to know them in a different way. And then mentoring is huge right now. And it's not mentoring of the past, it's really deliberate assignments that are helping associates to onboard and help to, with these touch points that I was talking about, make sure that people are getting. Oops, sorry, it got muted. So anyway, so we're doing this a lot, and I know I'm running out of time, but assigning partners to check in on associates and communicating these plans with all of management so that everybody's on the same page. And accountability is huge. If you're going to start any of these new initiatives with the mentoring, you need to make sure that you're reminding the attorneys to follow up with each other so that you are getting the information. And like I said, I know I'm running out of time, but I just spend a couple of minutes on the pitfalls and best practices to be aware of in this virtual environment. People value the opportunities to connect, but in a large group setting, it's not easy. And so you need to make things as small as possible, 4 to 6 people, anchor these meetings with somebody who is a good facilitator, and make sure that people are getting an opportunity to truly get to know each other. Recognize that people are burned out. There's very little separation from work and home, and it's important to raise awareness of the struggles that our attorneys are facing and provide the support and guidance they need. Providing mental health resources and activities that support good mental health is huge. Exercise classes, meditations, sharing honest conversations about the struggles that people that you work with are facing. And remind people to take breaks and stress that it's okay to be away from the screen for work-life balance. And all of these initiatives take time, and likely more time than was needed in person, but the return on investment is huge. And it's critical to ensuring that we're prepared to re-enter the firm when it's time, and that the culture remains intact and or is enhanced by the experiences over the last year. And I'm going to stop because I think I tried to cover a lot in a little amount of time, and happy to take questions now or later.
Sherry, that was huge, and that was a lot. Both you and Deanna have shown that this is not a crisis that is to be wasted, and that this is not something that can be left to chance or accident. Jordan Furlong talked about the need for an intentional approach to culture, and clearly it's important that we have a strategy in doing all this. A question has come up, and if you could spend 30 seconds to move on to Dan. But this is from Susan Duncan. Will office-specific culture be as important if many people will continue to work remotely for much of the time? And in some firms, they are now allowing lawyers to live in locations where there are no firm offices. Could you quickly respond to that?
I think we're going to find a lot more about practice group culture, that it's going to be about the people that you're working with and firm-wide. I think you're just seeing a lot more of that it's easier to interact with the people and the functions that you're working with. And so, yeah, office isn't as important to some firms. Some firms, they really truly want you to be in person, so they would never allow somebody to work outside of the office. But I think it's going to vary depending on the firm that you're at.
Thanks. We should, and all of that is sort of on the never waste a good crisis front. Now, what happens when things go really badly? And this is where Dan comes in. Dan, I'll just let you take it from here.
Hopefully Dan comes in. Can you hear me? All right. This is my fifth video call of the day, and of course I couldn't get my microphone to work when I joined the call. All right, I'm going to share my screen. I have a visual aid to help us along with my presentation. My World, Legal Professional Liability Claims, going to talk about the impact of the pandemic on malpractice claims, and I think some interesting and predictable impacts that we've seen, and I think a few surprises along the way. I'm the president and CEO of the Lawyers Professional Indemnity Company, or LAWPRO. It is the mandatory malpractice insurer for the 29,000 lawyers in private practice in Ontario. We insure everyone from solos up to the largest firms at a basic level, and we'll describe that in more detail as I go through the presentation here. A little bit about LAWPRO so you understand the context, a little bit about our policy so you understand the claims, scope of claims exposure that we have. Going to talk about our claims and the impacts. Happy to take questions at the end. 29,000 insureds. We see roughly 3,000 new claims on an annual basis, about 4,200 open files at any time. We spend about 100 million resolving claims on an annual basis. About 60% of that is indemnity costs. About 40% of that is defense costs defending claims. And a little teaser, many things stopped in 2020. Unfortunately, claims didn't. We saw a lower count, roughly 90% fewer claims in 2020 than we did in 2019. But interestingly enough, almost to the dollar, the costs for the claims as we predict them for 2020 will be roughly the same. Let's dive in. Just so you can get an idea of scope of coverage, our policy is narrow and specific, lawyers, legal professional liability only, higher limits than probably in many of your jurisdictions, at least for solos and smalls, $1 million per claim, $2 million in the aggregate. It's a claims made policy, so it includes prior acts. There's an innocent party coverage with a sublimited. We have limited cyber coverage. I know many firms would have cyber of some form, either through their LPL coverage or additional coverage, and we provide automatic runoff to a $250,000 lifetime cap on our policy, something that's probably different. Optional coverages by our base premium is currently $3,000 Canadian, and there's various discounts on the base premium. General claim stats, we see about 100 claims per 1,000 lawyers per year, and that's been fairly consistent over a long period of time. On average, claims are reported to us 2 to 3 years after the work is done. That's going to be an important pandemic-related thing, as you'll see in a second. It's the crowd in the middle, 6 to 25 years out, that have the most claims activity. Younger lawyers are a better claims risk, fewer claims, lower dollar claims. And used to be that the more senior lawyers were a better claims risk. That's changing as there's more of them and they stay on longer. We see similar errors, similar causes of loss, and similar severity across firms of all sizes, interestingly enough, and see the same types of claims occurring across the province. When we look across the body of all our insureds, 1 in 2 has had at least one claim while they've been insured with us. Only about 14% of our claims ultimately involve an indemnity payment. For larger firms, that might be 2 or 3% of their claims. The bulk are resolved without any finding of payment. And again, if we average the cost of claims across the different firm sizes, severity, i.e. the overall cost on an average basis per claim, is roughly the same. Bigger firms would have fewer indemnity-related claims, but when they get a prize, it tends to be a big one. Surprises here, I think, for some of you, failures to know or apply substantive law is only about 14% of the claims that we handle. Lawyer-client communication relationships, 29%. Time management, deadlines, procrastination, 19%. Something we call inadequate investigation or discovery of fact, 19%. That's the lawyer talking to the client, digging deep enough to get information to give the client specific advice about their particular matter, clerical, conflict of interest and fraud, and so on. And I have wellness off on the side. wellness is often an aspect or a cause of a claim, but we don't often know about it, and I'll come back and deal with that. A very similar claims profile here in many areas of the law, but some changes. If you're interested, you can dig deeper on our claims fact sheets there. Okay, the main show. What are the impacts that we've seen there? There you can see in blue, the weekly claim count by over the year 2019, orange is 2020, and in gray, the start of 2021. So you can see it goes up and down on a weekly basis. So we see fewer claims on shorter weeks where there's a holiday on a Monday or a Friday. Big decline over the holidays at Christmas, kind of up and down, lower through the summer, higher early in the year, and a bit higher in the fall time when, at least in our jurisdiction, people seem to want to clean up things for the year, and they're also getting a nudge from their excess carriers. As you can see, definite decline in claims coming into us through the summer. Things picked back up in the fall as things opened back up in Ontario. A bit of a drop off pre-Christmas, and this year is the same or higher than the last three or prior 2 years. So definitely things are coming back around. As in our jurisdiction, the courts have opened up. They were largely shut down for most of the summer. They're back up and running on a limited basis. Interestingly enough, litigation claims probably ran 75 to 80% of the volume that we saw last year, way down on litigation. New claims generally coming in were about 90%. In terms of coverage, complicated coverage denial claims, they ran about the same over the course of the pandemic that we saw in the prior year. When we look at area of law, some interesting changes here, 2019 versus the pandemic period of 2020. As you can see, litigation claims way down. As you expect from the courts being closed, real estate down. We saw very reduced real estate activity kind of through the summer, but of course, at least here in Ontario now, real estate has taken off. Many of the real estate lawyers I've talked to said they had their best year ever last year, and that continues to be the case. Wills and estates claims have jumped up, and not sure what is happening there. There's a pandemic impact on wills and estates that I'll come back to in a second. Not sure that entirely explains that. Family law claims are down a little bit as well, obviously because family law matters in the courts were significantly shut down. Not a lot of changes otherwise. There's the raw claims count, just to give you a different spin on those numbers. So you see litigation way down, wills up, family down, to make the points. When we look at what we call description of loss or error types, some interesting changes here. Communication down, which is almost counterintuitive because you would think more distant, remote communication, Zoom calls and all, that there might be more miscommunication. We've not seen that. Inadequate investigation or discovery of fact is up 4%, and I think that's clearly a function of more remote conversations, phone conversations, kind of Zoom calls, opportunities for broken telephone there. Time management is way down, largely a reflection there of reduced litigation claims, because that's where a lot of the time deadline limitation period related claims, and we're seeing more of those, and I'll come back to that in a second. Error of law, the same. Clerical errors up 2%. And again, clearly this aspect of remote work and clerks at home, lawyers at home, and miscommunications or dropping the ball. Fraud up a little bit. I'll come back and talk about that further on. There's just a different slice of the same data so that you can see the raw counts there. COVID-related claims, 53, what we attribute directly related to the pandemic. Three main types, probably just more than half are limitation or procedural deadline issues. We had limitation periods suspended for a period of 6 months here in Ontario, so we're seeing confusion over whether the suspension was up and did it end or not. What did it suspend? Limitation periods, procedural deadlines. We had temporary suspensions, and then they came back and kind of adjusted some of the temporary suspensions, so we've seen confusion over that. The other area or largest area, we've probably seen about approaching 20 claims out of the 53, what we would call loss in value or of asset or deal. So economic downturns always mean an increase of malpractice claims. Clients want to visit their loss on their lawyer, and they'll usually find a way to do that. And so it's in the case of a commercial deal, one side wants to close because it's now the deal of the century, and the other side wants out, and they'll blame their lawyers for a way out. On wills or estates matters, it's alleged that a delay in the resolution of the estate meant that things declined on the stock market or real estate values were lost, and that caused a loss. Now, of course, the real estate market has bounced back, stock market has bounced back, real estate has bounced. So we haven't seen the economic impact that we've seen previously. And just general practice management, we don't have any, interestingly enough, obvious mental health related claims. We've got at least one or two where things don't add up, and we suspect that there may be a mental health aspect. I'll come back to that in a second. Fraud or cyber claims, we usually see more fraud claims in economic downturns. People get desperate. I was going to say it's largely not the case this time. We didn't see any large fraud claims last year. We did see two large wire frauds recently, and these are absolutely textbook examples. Last minute change in instructions on where the money was to go that came in one case because the lawyer's email was compromised, and came in the other case because the client's email was compromised, and the fraudster sent instructions to the lawyer to direct payment elsewhere. Certainly firms are being hit by ransomware. It rarely causes us to see claims that arise there. Indicators of economic impact, I don't think for many lawyers it was as bad as we initially assumed it might be. Again, economic downturns always mean more claims. For us, we saw 10 to 15% increased costs in 2007, 2008, 2009. We've not seen that this time. We had some payment deferral requests. We've only seen slightly increased leaves of absence or switches to part-time. Our new calls was higher than budget this year. So people hung up their own shingle or got a job at a firm somewhere. We didn't see a significant decline in new calls starting practice, interestingly enough. And our premium suspensions right now are actually lower than they were at this point last year. Mental health and claims, we don't have hard stats. We know that mental health issues cause claims. It comes out as the file progresses. It's rarely admitted, and that's something that's out there. Again, we've only seen a few more to come there. And clusters, we've only seen one cluster. We thought we would see more. Again, the common scenarios here: overwhelmed juniors, lawyers with personal issues, files left behind by departing lawyers. Not seen those. Certainly the issues of culture and integration and support and communication, and I think it comes out on this slide. We think we're going to see more there. Anecdotal observations, more drinking, feelings of isolation. And if you've not read Jordan Furlong's The End of Serendipity post, and that goes back to the comments that Deanna and Sherry made on culture and interactions with people. Those are key to culture. I think they're also key to people for learning and getting the job done and asking questions when they're not sure what they're doing. Interesting, we're getting phone calls from juniors that are telling us they're feeling the pressures of maintaining billable targets, and concerns that the associates aren't communicating or participating at all. And so that's a culture, that's a communication thing, and that would be a worry. Looking ahead, it's still early days. Again, what we would see is a pipe that is an ongoing longer-term pipe, far longer than just the period of the pandemic. We're keeping the ears to the ground. We're promoting our claims prevention resources on Practice Pro. They're all wide open if you want to take a look at them, focusing our message on what we are seeing, the emerging claims risk limitation periods, serving, communicating with clients. We're promoting the member assistance program resources that are the program we and our Law Society support. And I think the big question for us is, when will lockdowns end, and where will the economy go? If we get more economic activity and things continue to do well, hopefully the malpractice claims will keep low. If we see ongoing lockdowns and the economy goes south, on a temporary basis or longer basis, then we would expect to see more claims in the future. That's it. Happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Dan. It's just another illustration of how unpredictable this whole experience has been for all of us, because so many of those findings were counterintuitive. Get to Tim in a second, but Dan, if you could spend 15 seconds very quickly, a question from Marcy Shunk is, are there any current examples or future expectations of insurers offering credits or reduced premiums for wellness programs? How about any other types of training or education, for instance, DEI, culture, project management, that sort of stuff?
There's an increased interest in the impact of mental health and wellness on insurance and on the regulator side on complaints. And we've got a move afoot here in Ontario to put a greater focus on it. I know some of the Nabrico companies in the US also have a focus where they have content that focuses in on that issue. I think many of us don't track directly the driver of claims in terms of mental health, often because we don't know or we can't tell or we're only suspicious about it. But I think the assumption is it's definitely there, and anything we can do to better support and help people through it. The amazing things to us, especially on the clusters, is when things crash and burn, where were the people that should have seen this coming? The associates, the staff members, and that's a concern.
All right, and thanks for that. And going from that vast sweeping sort of survey of the whole business, let's go into the vast sweeping survey of what happens internally. Tim, take it away on strategy and profitability.
Thank you, Mark. So I hope everyone got the instructions to bring your financial calculator, because we're going to go through a number of exercises here to bring home the points. Okay, so a few cameras so I can't see your laughing faces. All right, so we're not going to talk about the math. We're going to talk about the concepts. So first, I'm going to share my screen here. As always, there's a couple visuals which I think help illustrate the point. All right, let's dive in. So what is a pandemic? A year ago, who knew? Here's what I've always thought about this profession. The collective intellect of the lawyers and the dedicated professionals who work alongside or work for the lawyers, once they are focused on one issue, it's immense what they can do. And they learned a lot. Having been a professionally trained business person with the degrees and all the letters to prove it, we did scenario planning, but no one prepared us for this. It's such a rare occurrence, a 100-year event, that no one was ready. And yet law firms turned out to have a pretty good year. Law departments and other businesses as well. But let's talk about it. What were some of the things we had to do immediately? Well, the first thing that happened a year ago, we have to work from home, and we had to overcome the inertia of policies in law firms where, the arcane rules about, well, only partners can take out a laptop if you don't have one assigned to you. And oh, by the way, we only have 6 Zoom licenses. And I'm sorry, we can't authorize you to take out the equipment unless you come into the office and sign in triplicate and leave us a vial of your blood. And all sorts of things like that. Yet overnight, we had to provide everyone with equipment. I remember the discussions in the first days. Do we let people take an office chair because they simply don't have an extra chair to sit in their makeshift desk and so on? But we overcame that pretty quickly. We also had to overcome some of the inertia in policies from HR and the firm's general counsels who said, well, if the mailroom people can't work from home, then no one else can, because we must be all equal here. Unless, of course, you're a partner, in which you can do whatever you want, whether or not it runs afoul of laws or regulations or guidelines or firm policies. And so there was a lot of consternation at first over whether or not we should allow people to work from home, in large part because partners think they need their people around them. If I can see my people, I must be managing them well, which speaks more to their ability to hire people that they think can't work without supervision than anything else. But we had to overcome all of that, and we had to do it overnight, and we accomplished it. So there was some good progress in a very, very short amount of time. And then law firm leaders had to dig into a few other things. And one of the first things they wanted to do was what should be the simplest thing in any business. I want to send a note to all of our clients, letting them know that they can call our main number. Probably no one will pick up, but we will be checking voicemail every 30 seconds from now until infinity. So we're at work and you can call us. And yet they ran into a brick wall. And that brick wall is, the toxic combination of lawyers can opt out of any policies or technologies they choose not to enjoy. And so hoarding their own clients and contact names, or simply having poor processes to capture who our clients are, or other things such as, well, the actual client's name is in the time and billing system, but we're using the CRM to pull the list of who we contact in this emergency, and those two don't speak. And so all sorts of policies and technology and process issues came to the fore, and something as simple as, I want to contact clients, and when they couldn't do it. And so of course, marketers who are quite accustomed to almost on a daily basis combining multiple manual lists for this purpose were able to get it done. But it woke partners up, or managing partners up, to the notion that this laissez-faire approach to allowing people to use the processes we have and hoarding clients is something we probably need to address. They also had to move quickly into triage and prioritize. There was such uncertainty as to whether or not we'd have any billings come in at all for a period of time. So let's preserve as much cash as possible. And so they went through a simple process, simple triage, right? Okay, everyone, C-level, sit down, practice group leaders, management committee members, let's get in a room. Let's talk about it. Let's reprioritize. What are you working on? Does it generate revenue? Okay. Does it reduce costs? Okay, check. Does it avoid costs? Is it strategically important to us? Does it have operational importance? If it matches most of those things or all of those things, then let's keep doing it. Otherwise, C-level executives, you have the permission to say no. For the first time in your career, you can tell a partner no. And that was a significant change. So it turned out that they learned in this process, wait a minute, wow, we actually can ask these questions, and we can hold people accountable, and we can make better and informed decisions. So it was a pretty stunning realization. So the collective lessons they learned, very briefly, are that the way we run law firms is a series of choices. And God love them, the partners are the owners of the business. They can make whatever choices they want. However, let's stop pretending that the way a law firm operates was etched in stone and Moses brought it down from the mountain. This is simply our choice of how to run a business. And clients have always been baffled by that. For example, when the rates go up every year and the lawyers say, well, clients, you have to understand our costs go up. The clients are saying, well, we work hard at maintaining cost controls. Why don't you? And so that was a key lesson, that it turns out we can be adaptable and we can change. And that's something they've taken away and will continue to incorporate. Some other lessons are that we have a variety of different contributions by different people, by different practices, by different clients. And this sort of loose collection, this loose federation of silos that shares a logo on a business card and sometimes shares an office and overhead is not really the same as saying we have a coherent strategic focus, and therefore we can make strategic decisions about what to dial up, what to dial back, where to invest, where to dial back investment, and so on. And so very quickly it became clear that it's hard to move a big ship overnight. It's even harder when it's not really a big ship, but it's 10,000 ships tied together with thread. And moving them all in unison is a very challenging tool. So they became aware that, you know what, it turns out different practices, different matter types have different profit contribution. And therefore we need to make decisions differently. You can't just simply say, everyone cut 10%. Much the same as you can't say next year everyone grow revenue by 10%. That's just lazy management. Turned out we need to be more precise, but they didn't have that level of precision in their tools and their analysis. Now, it's okay to have differential profitability and differential revenue because we're a multi-line business. It's worse that they didn't know. They don't know which areas are in growth, which areas are in decline, where we have more competition, where we don't have more competition, because each year, once we decide that here's what our budget needs to be, we just create a price increase across the board and assume everyone will get on board, or else they're underperforming. And so they realize we need more precision in the way we manage our business. And that comes on the cost side of the ledger as well. So I'm picking on marketing on this slide here, but random acts of lunch do not make a strategic focus. And so as it turns out, as they look to preserve cash, they gave their C-levels permission to say no. And we said no to a lot of things that are just nice to have, but really don't fundamentally improve the business. And it happened in IT, it happened in office space, it happened in the headcounts we hire and that we need, and so on. Much of those investments were to satisfy the preferences of partners and not really fundamentally sound business decisions. So that was a pretty key lesson to learn. One of the greatest takeaways in this time, however, was that leaders in my memory, the first time that I can recall, it seems like the vast majority of firms put a freeze or reduce partner draws. The playbook for every recession in my adult life that I can remember has always been all other costs come first. The last thing we'll touch is partner profits. And because partners need to be paid like everyone else, they need cash flow. They really don't view this as a year-end issue. They view this as a now issue. And so all other costs to preserve cash flow have to be attacked first before partners. But this time, because of the immense scare, they said we need to put partner draws on the table. And there was also a lesson I think learned from 2008 where they cut up their businesses in such a way that when demand picked back up, they had to retool at a much higher cost than if they sustained their infrastructure. So it was a lesson learned. But when they cut partner draws, it exposed a couple things. We've got a number of owners in this business who do not want to be owners, who don't act like owners, and have zero interest in actually investing in the future of this enterprise. And so there's been a real question about whether or not we have a good understanding of what it means to become an owner in this firm, and if that's different than it was 10 years ago, what it means to be an owner in this firm, what are the actions and behaviors expected of you as an owner, and if you're not behaving in that way, what does it take to remain an owner in this firm? And we're recognizing that those philosophies, those values, those cultural norms might be out of step with our comp system, because if the comp system says those values are nice, but here's what we're really paying for, then people are going to do what they're paid for. And I don't mean that lawyers act selfish or any more selfish than the rest of us. What I mean is, given a choice between their own economic self-interest and the firm's economic self-interest, they'll probably choose their own economic self-interest. It's bad management to say, please act against your economic self-interest. It's good management to say, let's remove the choice by aligning what's good for the firm with what's good for the partners. And that's a fundamental realization. Another realization was during this process, whether it was management and operations and dealing with all of the communications and the flurry of technology discussions and licensing costs and all of the others, or whether it was leadership, which is communicating with your people or communicating with clients and setting a tone and setting a message, it's hard. And it's even harder when you're doing it on a part-time basis after 7 o'clock at night when the phone stops ringing from clients. And so they recognize that some of our people in management and leadership roles got it done, and others got it done regardless of their title. And then there's a number of folks that had titles and they were like a deer in the headlights. They didn't know what to do. Some practice group leaders had never held a practice group meeting, so they didn't even have a contact list for who to call to have some emergency cascade of telephone tree about what we're doing. And so they realized that, wait a minute, we need better governance. We need to put people in charge. We need to have clear lines of authority. We need to shift a lot more of the operational responsibility to these trained C-level executives that we have instead of treating them as trophy wives. Let's actually say you can be in charge of things and make decisions. And so it turned out to be a nice sustainable lesson. So that's really the end of my remarks. I'll just touch on what the other speakers have talked about. The notion that we can be adaptable is a competitive advantage. And it turns out firms are a lot more adaptable than they thought they could be. They also are, and it's a legitimate concern about culture and collaboration, but collaboration, they've learned, is about intention. If we actually have a process to collaborate on a matter or with a client or with each other, it doesn't kill our culture. We don't have to be in the same room, let alone the same zip code, if we're intentional about it. And the notion of adopting space that allows people to sit together and communicate and have a whiteboard, if we don't have a process for using that space, those two are disconnected. And so we won't have the collaboration. So proximity gives us an illusion of collaboration and culture, but it's really a more intentional. And finally, of course, the talent pool. It turns out that great person we had to lose because their spouse moved across the country. Well, why would we ever make that decision again? We can have people working anywhere. If they're talented, we can recruit from anywhere. And you know what? We'll get on planes again and we can fly to an office now and again to meet the people, shake hands, look people in the eye and that sort of stuff. But we don't always have to be in the same building near a courthouse. And lastly, our operating footprint is a variable. As I said before, clients have always been baffled when law firms raise their prices as if the cost of doing business is always higher year after year. And they're saying, but you can control that. And our operating footprint, whether it's reducing space or having a different FTE mix or more flexible staffing models or using technology to deliver legal services, they learned a lot of lessons in the last year about how to generate profits and how to manage a law firm and deliver legal services with a fundamentally different operating model. So those are the end of my remarks.
Thanks, Tim. I just kind of am reflecting here. This is the best pandemic ever. It just sounds like it sounds like we learned a lot, other than some of the danger that comes from the malpractice component that Dan outlined for us. But Tim, you've really outlined some of the more interesting things that have arisen of this and summarized what Deanna and Sherry have also brought forward. I guess a question for the whole group. I'll open it up, and we're out of time officially, but we're not going to turn this off. So we will stick around for a few more minutes. But I'm just thinking now, if we can look forward, and I open this to all 4 panelists. Are there things now that are stuck, that are stepwise changes that are beneficial to the practice that we know now with some confidence will be sustaining?
One thing that comes to mind from my perspective is areas that we're stuck is how we did things before is not how we should be looking at how we're going to do things in the future. And that pivots on every sort of wheel that we might have, from a financial perspective to a space perspective to people perspective. I think that is key, and we have to get unstuck, be unprepared, like I said.
Tim, quickly, just to direct it to you a minute, because so much of this has been a kind of a pulling together of these intensely social environments. And there's been this notion of sustained effort in crisis. But as the crisis recedes, might people go back readily to old behaviors?
I think there's a huge risk of that. There's a number of law firms I've talked to, some I work with, who are in areas where they're either deemed essential, so they never closed, or they've been deemed important enough to have partial capacity for some time. So while many of us are just now looking at, returning to the office, some have been doing it for a long time. And in those firms, this is not a political discussion. It's a health discussion, an operational discussion. Some are saying the partners don't care. They want their people in the office. And so the moment someone in authority says they can, they're going to demand it. And the reality is that's a huge competitive disadvantage when now people are mobile and they have choices. And if you're going to publicize, this is our quality of life and this is our operating footprint, and others are going to say, we don't care where you work. In fact, come to the office occasionally, work 6 hours a day instead of 12, and so on. So I think that inexorable pull of partners saying, but this is what I'm familiar with and this is what I'm comfortable for, I think that will come back to the fore once we're out of battlefield mode. And there is a different model for leading and managing in a crisis, in a battle, than there is in peacetime. And so the shift to peacetime management, hopefully we don't fundamentally lose these lessons, but they will have to be administered in different ways, because you can't just give commands to people in peacetime that you can in a battle.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think that resonates. Got a question from Dennis Kennedy for Deanna. The open office concept was often used to cram more people into smaller spaces. Do you expect a return to private offices or more thoughtful open office models in the next few years?
I hope so, because I think that is the way we should be working. And if you need heads down in quiet space, you know that you can actually do that elsewhere now. It's been proven. I think our biggest challenge was saying, you guys, we can do this. We just need to be this differently. And everybody's like, no. I think now there's ways to say that it can work. Depending on home dynamics, it can work.
The old existence proof argument. We've shown that it can, therefore it does. I just want to thank, I'll just take, if there are any questions, of course, keep popping them at me, but I recommend that everybody just hit the reaction buttons and use their applause icons and their thumbs up icons, and to thank the speakers for having taken the time to do this. It to me has been extremely instructive, and I've really enjoyed this last hour. Oh, that's kind of cool. I've never seen that before. Look at all that. Everybody's doing it. Nice. All right, I think that if there are other questions, please direct them to me or to Debbie O'Connell. Debbie's email you have based on the scheduling, and we will then forward them on to the speakers who have committed, well, I'm committing them to answering the questions in a timely way as best we can. This program will be posted to the college website, and I think we will do some more of these as we learn more about the implications of this great global catastrophe that seems to have done the law practice so many favors. And with that, Debbie, I think we can shut it down. I'm not seeing any more
Thank you, Mark.
programs.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.